Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail, the realm where the shadows whisper ancient secrets and nightmares come to life. I am your guide through the darkness, and on this channel, we delve into the spine-chilling world of Wendigo horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. First story. I think I saw a Wendigo through the train window. It is as the title states. I am fairly certain that I saw a Wendigo out the window of the train. If that were the only event that happened, then I wouldn't have any reason to tell my story. In order to get into what happened, let me start off at the beginning of my day. It was a normal Saturday as far as I was concerned. I stayed up until about 3 a.m. playing the newest online mobile game with my brothers. Yes, I know, it is considered a sin to cheat by using my brother's screens to determine who the imposter is, but I'm not getting into that debate right now. I woke up not too long after 9 a.m., played on my phone a while, and then hopped out of bed, threw on the same clothes I had on the day before, and headed downstairs to the kitchen. I threw together my favorite breakfast food while my brothers both groggily dragged their feet to meet me. My twin brother, Gabe, decided to shower to wake himself up, while my younger brother, Zach, decided to partake in the feast of homemade waffles with peanut butter and chocolate milk. By the time Gabe was dressed and sitting at the kitchen table, Zach and I had already finished putting the dishes into our dishwasher and cleaned off the table. I had packed in advance and my train wasn't for a few more hours. So my brothers and I had pulled our phones out and began terrorizing the servers of Among Us for a little while. After we grew tired from the online insults and cyberbullying that we received for cheating, we played some Mortal Kombat on our PS4. It was a very relaxing morning, all things considered. As I prepared to collect my luggage and leave for the train station, I reiterated the food plans to my siblings. The roast is in the slow cooker. All you'll have to do is clean up. It is going to be finished at 6 today, and if you aren't sure if it's done, then shoot me a picture. I continued speaking over my Gabe's attempts of assuring me that they'd be fine without me. Remember, tomorrow is oven-baked chicken fingers and fries. After school Monday is burgers, and you can order anything you want for Tuesday and pay a tip. I rushed my sentence as Gabe held the front door of our tiny rented house open for me. Chrissy, we'll be fine, okay? Chill out, okay? Gabe chuckled to himself. You're right. You'll be fine. Do your homework. I love you guys. See you Wednesday. I called to them as I headed down the paved driveway and towards the bus stop down the road. Hasta la vista, baby. As Zach yelled my favorite movie reference of all time at me, I couldn't help but smile. They'll be fine. I raised them well, I thought to myself. I looked at them waving in the open front door and gave them a very flat and stern expression. I'll be back. I deepened my voice as best as possible before smiling and heading back towards the bus stop. My parents were extremely busy people all our lives. Gabe was born with a learning disability and required more attention from my parents than I needed. I had to grow up and mature faster to be able to take care of Gabe, as our mother was a full-time principal in our local school and a part-time student tutor, while my father worked as a warehouse manager full-time and was often working the midnight shifts. He worked those shifts due to the employees' reputations to be unproductive. He always said he needed to straighten them out. My father would sleep all day, and my mother would work all day. I would always prepare Gabe's lunches and walk him to school, walk him home, and make him dinner. I helped him with his homework. I read him bedtime stories. I tucked him into bed. I was always there for him. Zach was born a week before my 9th birthday with Gabe. By now, Gabe had quickly matured, surprising everyone. He was potentially even smarter and more socially acceptable than I was, though he didn't have the same parenting skills that I had developed and therefore wasn't entirely confident in even turning on an oven or setting a microwave timer. Anyways, By the time Zach came around, I was well aware that I'd have to raise him too. I so desperately wanted my mom and dad to be real parents for little Zach, to be there for him and be what Gabe and I never had. But I knew deep down inside that that wouldn't happen. By the time I was Gabe and I were 18 and Zach had just turned 9, the three of us moved out and into our own apartment. I wasn't even sure that our parents would notice Zach's absence, to be honest. They had no issues with us all moving in together. They said to me themselves that they knew Zach was better off with us than them. They said he was never supposed to be, which entirely angered me. Because of this, Gabe and I started to call Zach our miracle brother. Despite our age gap, the three of us were extremely close with one another. It was us three against the world. Nobody would change that. Then about a year ago, I fell in love with my old high school crush. His name is Brian. We were always close friends since grade 9, but as high school came to a close and we parted ways for university, we confessed our love. It was a very corny movie moment to me. Even through long distance, we made our relationship work. Gabe and Zach were obviously jealous that Brian was taking all of my attention. They were afraid that Brian was going to take me away from them. All that aside, they liked my boyfriend. They were all friendly and had good laughs together. They were happy for us. So here I am, at the train station awaiting my train to my boyfriend on our first-year anniversary. I anxiously awaited the train, wondering with me when I got back. Maybe they were mad already. Or maybe they aren't upset at all. I talked myself into thinking that I was doing the right thing, even though my stomach was turning violently. I was feeling very nauseous. It had nothing to do with anything I ate. I had a horrible feeling. Something inside me was telling me that something bad was going to happen. I didn't listen to it at the time. I thought it was all just the nerves of traveling. I was just too excited to see Brian. The train was quite long. It went from my small little town of southern Ontario to the northern and frigid climate that is stereotypically portrayed as all of Canada. Overall, the trip to Brian's apartments was close to 12 hours. However, that includes the train ride along with the bus and the drive that Brian has to take from his apartment to where I arrive on the train and back to his apartment. I had boarded the train and been seated when one of the train staff members asked to scan my ticket. I quickly apologized for not being prepared and dug through my luggage to find my ticket. After ensuring that I was settled and asking if I had wanted any food or drink for the ride, the staff member had moved along down the aisle. I looked around the car, noticing only 3 other passengers before pulling out my laptop from my bag and popping my headphones into my ears. I sent a text to my parents informing them of my absence from my hometown for the next few days and threw on some YouTube. Gaming channels were always a favorite, but recently Gabe had gotten me hooked onto a game theory channel. I could sit there for hours watching the different conspiracy theories about video game lore, and for the first half of my trip, that's exactly what I did. The early winter sunset filled the skies with orange and pink highlights as I had decided to put my laptop away and watch the window with my music playlist on. I had always enjoyed listening to music on long trips, especially across the country. I tried to imagine cheesy movie scenes taking place in the open fields with slow songs playing and faceless couples slow dancing. Within about an hour after I first peered out my window, the snow had begun. At first, it was a light flurry, hardly visible as the train sped along the tracks. Eventually, it was blizzarding. Simply looking outside gave me chills, as I never enjoyed being in the snow. Second story. The deep dark woods. It was maybe about 2 weeks in summer vacation. My friends, Josh, Miguel, Alex, Michelle, and Amanda were all bored. Josh, being the outdoorsy type, suggested we all go camping for the weekend. Michelle was just lying Josh, so she agreed. But the rest of us didn't. Until Josh said he would bring some chocolate. We all immediately packed up and agreed we'd go camping. I was the only one who had a driver's license, though, so I had to borrow Mom's car to get to the woods. I picked up my friends, and we headed down the path. Miguel was in the front seat, and the rest were at the back. Amanda was always on her phone, so we had to stop loads of times because she needed to puke. We passed a small cabin and a large lake and arrived in the campsite. Josh prepared the large tent he brought for us to sleep in. Amanda was taking a lot of selfies. Michelle went out for a hike. Miguel was feasting on some snacks while I just laid out my hammock and played some video games. It was getting dark, so Josh quickly finished the tent and had to set up the campfire. Amanda was complaining about the signal while Michelle and Miguel were playing rock, paper, scissors. I was starving, so we brought the snacks and ate around the campfire. We ate Doritos, hot dogs, some eggs, and a couple of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. After we ate, Miguel suggested we tell some stories and suggested Amanda go first. Amanda was hesitant, MKSTLY, because she was taking selfies for her Instagram, but Miguel insisted, so she sighed and looked up a story. She eventually found one about a family that lived in a small house in the woods, but then the dad shot them both, buried them, and then took his own life. She then said the spirit of the man roams these parts of the woods. Josh was the coward of the group, so he made up an excuse while stuttering and actually ran towards the tent. We all laughed at him, and then Miguel suggested I tell a story. Josh kept signing the word no, but I just ignored him. I was about to tell it, but then Amanda complained her phone signal was low, so she walked away from us, looking for better service. We exchanged glances and I continues the story. It was about a family who went camping when the children only screamed. As if in cue, Amanda suddenly screamed for help. We all ran towards her, and we kept telling her she should keep screaming so we can find her. The screams drowned out, and we lost her. Josh was actually shivering because he thought Amanda was mauled by a bear. Michelle suggested we call her, so we know where she is, so I pulled out my phone and called her. We heard her phone ring right behind a giant rock, and we found a pool of blood with Amanda's phone buzzing in the middle of it. Miguel and Josh ran to the other side of the rock and puked. Michelle and I gave each other disgusted looks and impatiently waited for them. We all decided to head back to the campsite, but we realized we were completely lost. All we could see was trees. By now, it was very dark. Out of the corner of my eye, I see something standing. It was a person. I thought it was Amanda, so I ran towards her. I was thinking she had played a prank on me, but then it disappeared. I was wondering where it went until I heard choking behind me. Miguel was in the trees, hanging on a noose. Everyone was absolutely shocked. Eventually, Miguel ran out of oxygen and died. We tried to break him free, but to no avail. Michelle started to cry, and we were no closer to finding Amanda. Then, there was light up ahead. We ran towards it, and we found our campsite. We sat around the campfire and thought of a plan. Josh suggested we escape while we can, but Michelle and I chose not to, because Amanda might still be alive, just lost. Josh didn't listen to us, though, so he grabbed my car keys and was trying to start the car. We banged on the windows trying to tell him that he shouldn't leave us all alone, but he didn't listen and drove off. Michelle and I decided to find Amanda ourselves, so we headed off. But then, Michelle had a knife sticking out of her chest. Her blood spewed all over me as she fell to the ground. I looked behind the tent and saw Amanda standing there. Third story. The Wendigo. I am writing everything down in this journal to document our journey to Fort Kent and the subsequent events that transpired afterward. I hope that whoever finds this journal will publicize what had happened in this town to us between the dates of January 12th to February 13th, 2018. Do you know of the Fort Kent Wendigo in Alberta, Canada? Most would say it is an urban legend, But after what I have read and experienced, my view has taken 180-degree turn. It all started when myself and a group of 3 friends wanted to make a Bollywood movie about the Wendigo. After spending 2 weeks of researching the Wendigo and what they looked like, I found the Wendigo of Fort Kent. Some say that a doctor locked himself in his house with his dead wife that had just died of smallpox. Then he ate her and turned into the Wendigo. Along with his wife, many of the townsfolk died from smallpox. Once the man left his home, he killed and ate the remaining dozen or so residents of the town. No one is really sure about what happened, but there is one fact no one can deny. Fort Kent became a ghost town, and no one really knows why. After finding out all of this information, I knew that we had a great idea for a movie. The only problem was the place was pretty isolated. So if we got into any trouble, it would be days before anyone would be able to help them. Luckily, Bobby's parents were filthy rich, since they were both plastic surgeons. They spoiled Bobby rotten and gave him everything he wanted. Even so, he was a pretty down-to-earth guy and one of my best friends. Along with Bobby, there was Mike and Kylie. As for myself, the producer of the soon-to-be movie, my name is Tara. So we took off in a small jet, heading from Ottawa, Ontario, Canada to Elk Point Airport, Alberta. We took a fancy Canon 80D DSLR camera with us to shoot the movie, as well as a portable field mixer, a wireless microphone system, a shotgun microphone and boom pole, wind protection for the mics, a field recorder, and headphones. Along with all of that equipment, we brought camping equipment. When we got to Elk Point Airport, we rented a Hyundai Tucson, loaded it up with all of our equipment, and headed for Bonnyville. Now it usually takes 45 minutes to an hour to drive to Bonnyville, but we were going in January. They had just gotten 24 cms of snow, and the roads were heavy with snow. It took us 3 hours to get to Bonnyville, where we got groceries and lots of alcohol for our month's stay in the ghost town of Fort Kent. For a bit of background, the 4 of us have been friends since elementary and just graduated high school. We decided to take a year off before heading to college and came up with the bright idea of making a horror movie. Bobby's parents had given Bobby the sound equipment and camera as a graduation present. We spent the summer figuring out what we were going to film when we came across the urban legend of the Wendigo of Fort Kent. Since then, we have been obsessed about the film. After we had gotten the essentials needed for our trip to the ghost town, we headed for the fort. January 12, 2018, Day 1. We arrived in Fort Kent around 2 p.m. It took us 4 hours to set up all the tents and gear. We decided to set up near the outskirts of town. For some reason, we felt more comfortable here. No one said anything, but everyone got more nervous the further we went into town. By the time we were all set up, the sun had already set, and we couldn't see anything past the glow of the bonfire. We decided to drink the night away, talking about all the things we would do once the morning came. Around 10 p.m., we started to notice snowflakes starting to fall. We huddled around the fire more, but when the wind started picking up as well, we decided to call it a night. We had 2 tents set up, one for me and Mike and the other one for Kylie and Bobby. Mike and I lay on top of a blow-up queen-sized mattress that had 3 heavy covers on top of it. The 2 of us got under the blankets and looked up at the ceiling. I could feel Mike trying to get into my pants, but I shrugged him off. This place was giving me a bad vibe, and I wasn't in the mood. The walls of the 8-person tent shook as the wind and snow pummeled against the tent, making it difficult to hear anything. At the time, I didn't think anything of it, but I swore I thought I could hear the howl of a wolf through the sound of the wind. January 13, 2018, Day 2. I woke up around 6 a.m. this morning to Mike snoring beside me. His arm was draped around me as my eyes slowly opened. The tent was still and the sound of the wind was silent. I brought my hand up to his arm and pulled it off of me. I rolled off the bed and pulled myself off of the floor. I quickly got dressed. To my surprise, it was warmer inside than I thought it would have been. I put on a parka and toque and opened the flap that led outside. A foot of snow fell into the tent the moment the flap was open. I let out a startled, silent meep and jumped back. I looked behind me, wondering if I had awoken Mike. To my relief, he was still snoring away. I composed myself and pulled myself out of the tent and into the snow. The snow crunched under my boots as I walked outside. I stood at 5'8" and had the snow reach up to my knees, so overnight we had gotten a fair amount of snow. So it took me by complete surprise when I saw a set of footprints traveling through the snow around our tents. I figured that Bobby must have gotten up during the night and had a smoke. So again, I didn't think much of it. I looked towards the town. 2 run-down houses stood about 100 feet away. Then I looked to my right and saw our rental vehicle completely covered in snow. I spent the next 2 hours cleaning off the vehicle of snow. By the time I had finally gotten it cleaned, the rest of my friends had gotten up and started walking around. Bobby had taken out his camera and started to film the area. The last I had seen him, he was heading into town with Kylie while Mike came over to me. We talked a while about the project we were working on. We didn't have any shovels, so getting the SUV out of the area we were in was very difficult. Eventually, after much effort, we got the SUV out and onto the soft snow. The 4-wheel drive made the situation a little better. We both got into the SUV and drove it through the town. We followed the footprints that seemed to go to each house in the town, until finally the footprints went to a house and there weren't any footprints coming back out. We parked the SUV on the side of the road, got out and headed to the house the footprints went to. Turns out, the house had looked like someone had been living in it recently. We found them in the basement. Bobby was filming writing, which was covering every square inch of the basement. On one side of the wall it read, "Beware the Wendigo." As the writing went along the wall, the writing got more and more messy. By the end, the writing became scratches in the wall. Finally it read, "I am the Wendigo." We did some more shooting, making an introduction to the movie. By the time 4 p.m. came around, we decided to head back to the campground and pack it in for the night. By the time we got back to camp, it was pitch black outside. We parked the SUV beside the tents and all 4 of us headed inside mine and Mike's tent. We continued to drink and had a cold dinner from soup cans. We played cards until 10 p.m., right until we heard a howl coming right outside of our tent. We had been talking pretty loudly, so we hadn't heard it approach. We could hear the sound of crunching snow under heavy footprints. Then its shadow cast itself on the tent, and the only thing we could see were its legs. Not only was the creature bipedal, but it was huge. Mike was about to open the flap to check what it was, when we heard the sound of metal being torn to pieces. The sound of the car alarm going off as it did. I wanted to scream, but I was too terrified to do so. Soon the sound of metal being torn to shreds stopped and silence ensued. I was about to let out a sigh of relief when I heard another howl. Then the sound of the other tent being torn to shreds could be heard. After another 5 minutes, the sound faded and we could hear the creature walking away from our tents. We waited until midnight to get out of our tent and see the damage. The car and tent were destroyed. We had left most of our food in the car, and from what we could see there was no food left. Kylie started to cry and Bobby tried to console her, while Mike and I just stood there in shock wondering what we would do next. Bobby had brought his camera into our tent, but the sound equipment he had been in his tent and was now destroyed as well. We realized that our project was finished and we would have to go back to Bonneville in the morning. We didn't get much sleep that night, and this was only the tip of the iceberg. Our stay in Fort Kent was only just starting. January 14, 2018, day 3:08 a.m. Mike left today to go and get help early this morning. The only thing he brought with him was a bottle of water and a few supplies. On a good day, it would take just over 2 hours to walk from Fort Kent to Bonneville. But judging by the thickness of the snow he has to trudge through, it could take a lot longer. We may not be rescued until much later. January 14, 2018, day 3:06 p.m. Mike is still not back from Bonneville. We heard a howl far in the distance around 10 a.m. in the direction of where Mike was headed. We hope that whatever had destroyed our tent and SUV didn't get Mike too. We are still holding out hope that Mike had made it to Bonneville, and the rescue team is just having a difficult time getting here due to the heavy snowfall. Meanwhile, boneheaded Bobby decided to go back into town this morning with his camera. Kylie didn't follow him this time. She was crying too hard to even think about leaving camp. The sun set 2 hours ago, and he is still not back yet. I am getting very nervous right now. The tent feels colder than ever right now without Mike. I miss him a lot and wish that he would get back soon. January 15, 2018, day 4:01 a.m. Mike and Bobby never came back yesterday. Kylie and I are curled up together under 3 layers of blankets. Kylie finally managed to fall asleep around 10 p.m. last night after crying all day. The reason why I am writing in my journal now is because I thought I heard howling again. Once I was awake, I heard something else. It was screaming. It was coming from the town, so it must be Bobby. Oh God, why did we come to Fort Kent? The screaming has gone on for the past hour and hasn't stopped. Kylie is still somehow sleeping though all of this. I don't know how it is possible. January 15, 2018, day 4:03 a.m. I don't know if I should be happy or sad, but the screaming from the town has ceased. I hope that Bobby had gotten away, but chances are that whatever was making him scream finally killed him. January 15, 2018, day 4:06 a.m. I just saw someone walking back from the town. I thought it was Bobby at first. He had managed to get away from the beast. But as the man got closer to where we were, I stood there dumbfounded. It was Mike. How the hell did he come back in the opposite direction from the city? Mike noticed me as well and started to run as fast as he could through the knee-high snow. He told me everything that had happened to him since he left the camp 24 hours ago. He said that he had been walking all day yesterday, going nonstop. He only stopped to take brief sips of water. He told me that around 10 a.m. he heard the howl as well. It had been really close to him, and it freaked him out. Luckily, there had been a cluster of trees near the area he was at and died behind the nearest tree. He heard the beast walking down the road that he had come in on and dared to take a peek from out behind the tree he was currently hiding behind. Now he was about 20 feet away from the road, and the tree he was hiding behind was about 30 feet tall. So when he tells me that the creature he saw was as tall as the tree he was hiding behind, it gave me an idea of how monstrous this beast really was. Even though the thing was really tall, it was lanky and bent over. It had a snout-like face and antlers coming out the top of the head. Its arms and legs had no skin, and no muscle. You could see its bony arms and legs. It had fur covering its shoulders and sharp, elongated teeth. When the monster was right in front of him, it turned around and stared in Mike's direction. Mike had backed behind the tree, hoping to God the thing didn't see him. The thing became deathly silent. It didn't make a sound for half an hour. He lay his back against the tree the entire time. He felt like the thing was playing with him. It knew he was there, but for some reason didn't come after him. He said that when the thing finally started to stomp his way down the road again, he felt really sleepy. By the time he woke up, it was dark and he really needed to get to Bonneville. So he continued down the road. The cold was really starting to get to him, and he needed shelter sooner rather than later. That was when he saw a building in the distance. It took 20 minutes to finally trudge up to the place. Luckily, the door was unlocked, and no one was inside. There was no heat and no bed, so he went to the warmest and most intact room in the house and slept. When 1 a.m. rolled around, he heard the howling and screaming nearby. It was strange because he swore that it was Bobby whose voice he heard. That was impossible since he had to be a couple of miles away from Fort Kent by now. He didn't sleep after that, and at 3 a.m. when the screaming stopped, he headed back out again. When he started down the road again, he thought he reached another deserted town. As he walked, he realized in dismay that this was not a new town, but Fort Kent. He swore that it was impossible that he was back in the town. If he had gotten turned around, he would have seen Tara first, not the other side of the town. January 15, 2018, day 4:10 a.m. We took stock of what little resources we had left. We had 10 water bottles. We used to have 12, but Mike had 2. He seemed really dehydrated when he returned. We had 3 granola bars and 2 bags of chips, but from what we had it wouldn't sustain the 4 of us for very long. Well, there was still only 3 of us at this point. The next step we had to take was find what happened to Bobby. From the screaming we had heard from the night before, it was possible that the monster had gotten Bobby and killed him, or eaten him. Kylie and Mike and I took a bottle of water each and 1 granola bar. Kylie seemed to be doing a lot better than yesterday. She stopped crying some time late last night and has been strong ever since. By the time we entered the town, it was 11 a.m. Kylie told us about the houses she and Bobby had gone into the second day we had gotten here. More than likely, Bobby wouldn't have gone into the houses he already went in. So we started at the house we had ended at the last time. We walked through the entire town going house to house. We ended up not finding anything. We followed a set of footprints to a house. When we got there, we searched the house from head to toe, but couldn't figure out what the footprints led to. Defeated, we headed back to camp an hour before sunset. We stopped in our tracks as soon as the camp came into view. The second tent that was still intact before was now shredded to pieces as well. We were now left in the middle of a ghost town with no food and little water. If that wasn't bad enough, we were trapped in this town with a monster. We didn't know what to do. We had nothing but ourselves left. January 16, 2018, day 5:08 and 5 seconds a.m. Last night was really difficult for the 3 of us. We walked to one of the houses that were just in view of what used to be our tents. The house was pretty dilapidated, and the 3 of us ended up huddled together in a closet. There were some dusty and dirty old clothes in the closet that we draped over our bodies to try and keep warm. I looked down at my phone. It was dead now. As useless to me now as it had been when it was still working. There was no reception out here. We had even tried to call 911. All we got in response was, "Phone operator, we are sorry, but the number you are trying to reach is not in service. Please hang up and try your call again." We tried many times to get through to anyone, but the same message kept coming back to us. Last night, in a fit of rage, I took my phone and hurled it down the road away from the town. We were trapped in this ghost town with no food. Luckily, we had snow all around us, so we could melt the snow and drink the water it gave us. Last night was the worst night we had since we arrived. We knew that it was snowing. It was the last thing we saw before entering the closet we now occupied. Besides that, there was no other sound to be heard. It was definitely quite like we were the only inhabitants left in this world. There was no screaming. There was no beastly howl. Just pure and utter silence. The type where you could hear your heart beating. Neither Mike or I slept at all last night until 6 a.m. Kylie on the other end had cried herself to sleep around 9 p.m. last night. When we finally awoke, there was snow on our side of the closet. Mike was already awake, while I heard snoring coming from beside him. I pulled off the dirty clothes that had been covering me and pushed the closet door open. Wisps of snow blew into the closet. The entire top floor had a thin layer of snow covering the ground. I got up and walked to the front of the house, where the wall was completely missing. It looked as if another 20 cms of snow had fallen overnight. All the footprints we had created over the last 5 days were now gone. From what I could see, it would be very difficult to move around the neighborhood now. I heard the crunch of footsteps coming from behind me. I was so paranoid at that point I spun around expecting to see a monster. I let out an audible sigh when I saw it was only Mike. He walked up beside me and wrapped his arms around me and stared outside along with me. January 16, 2018, day 5:12 p.m. After scrounging around the house for any supplies, we checked our knapsacks and took stock of the supplies we had. We had no food left by this point. Our water situation wasn't much better considering it was too cold for the snow to melt in our water bottles. So we resorted to putting snow in our mouth and eating it. We were getting weak by this point at the lack of food. The last thing any of us ate was the granola bar we had yesterday. So when Kylie finally came out of the closet, we headed outside and into the deep snow. We walked past an open field. Across the street was a church. We had gone through all the houses in the town and had yet to check out the church. So we walked up the front doors of the church and pushed the door. Out of all the buildings in the town, the church was the most intact. The windows were all broken, but wooden boards covered them. The door hadn't been opened in I don't know how many years, and it took all 3 of us to open the door. After 10 minutes, with the door squealing like a banshee from lack of use, we managed to get the door open halfway. Kylie went in first, followed by Mike. Before I went inside, I thought I heard a sound. I turned around and looked across the street. I thought I saw a shadow moving across the field, but the shadow was indistinguishable. I shook my head and followed the others into the church. I nearly bowled over Mike and Kylie as I walked through the doors. For some reason, they were just a few feet away from the threshold of the door and seemed to be transfixed by something. I pushed my way between the 2 of them and looked to see what they were looking at. On the altar at the back of the church sat a table. On top of the table sat a feast. There was all types of meats and potatoes and greens. Kylie ran up to the table and took handfuls of meat and started to devour what was on the table. Mike and I, on the other hand, walked up to the table. I found it extremely odd that there would be a feast of this magnitude in a ghost town. I stopped just short of the table, and so did Mike. We both knew that something was definitely off, and weren't hungry enough to eat whatever sat on that table. Then I realized what was bothering me. Even though the food on the table looked freshly cooked, there wasn't the sweet aroma of cooked meat in the air. The more I thought about it, the more the meat in front of me changed. Instead of a feast, there was a bloody mess of flesh and blood. I saw blood dripping from the crucifix that Jesus hung on, and my eyes slowly rose, until my eyes finally rested upon where Jesus' face would be. Only it wasn't Jesus, it was Bobby. I fell to my knees and yelled for Kylie to stop. I told her that she was eating Bobby. She turned around and looked at me confused. All I could do was point at the head of Bobby, which now sat atop of Jesus' head. This seemed to break her out of her trance. She looked down at her hands and body and let out a shrill scream as she realized that she was covered in blood and gore. Mike ran over to her and lifted her up. I walked over to her as well. Mike and I carried Kylie to the entrance of the church. We both looked at each other, giving each other a knowing glance over Kylie's head. After that, we walked back to the house we had camped in the night before and went into the basement of the house. The 3 of us just sat there. January 21st, 2018, day 10:08 a.m. We have camped in the basement of that house since day 5. Nothing really had been going on for the last couple of days. Mike and I had gone searching for food. This town has been picked clean, however. We resorted to going into the woods near the town. We found nothing, and the hunger pains are starting to really get to myself and Mike. Kylie, on the other hand, is the one we are really concerned about. If the story of the Wendigo is true, then Kylie has committed cannibalism, and she will become a Wendigo herself. We were hopeful at first, but she started getting aggressive after that first night. We tied her up in the basement of the house across the street while Mike and I stayed in the basement of the house, which had become our new campground. We still haven't heard or seen the giant Wendigo since Mike saw it on the 4th day we had been here. I feel, however, that the Wendigo is leaving us alone, letting us starve ourselves. Also waiting to see what will become of Kylie. 4th story. It came from deep within the woods. I was living on the edge of the woods in a broken-down van with my friend who happened to be a prostitute at the time. I realize that's a loaded sentence, but my dear reader, I assure you, I couldn't possibly fabricate what I am about to reveal. We were both hopeless drug addicts, and my days were often spent simply waiting for her to return to our humble abode with whatever goods she could get her hands on. It's key to mention this. Despite my reluctance, I want to paint a picture of how utterly alone I was out there, on the edge of the woods. No phone, no car, no neighbors. Just me and my books. I had become an absolute recluse, isolated sans Herman Melville and the alleged prostitute. I often slept away the days and stayed awake throughout the night. I began to get sort of anxious when my loose friend made the comment along the lines of something like, "Geez, don't you ever just get creeped out being here all alone? Some psycho could come murder the shit out of you, and no one would ever know." She oftentimes teased me so. We both had a sick sense of humor. It wasn't until she made this crass commentary on our pathetic living situation that my daydream turned into a nightmare. She had a good point. Late one night, I hopped out of our Volkswagen Westphalia to take a leak, and I began to survey my surroundings. From the driver's side of the van, the nearest road was about 100 yards away, but we were so far out in the boonies that this hardly meant anything. On the other side of the van, the main entrance and exit consisted of a big sliding door, facing about 30 yards of clear flat ground, followed by a swift drop-off into thick bushes and trees. Usually the only light, natural or unnatural, came from the flashlight I used inside the van to read with. We stuck out in those woods, a real eyesore smack dab in the middle of the mysterious beauty of Mother Night and Mother Nature. I grew paranoid. I laughed aloud to myself to lift my spirit. I couldn't shake the feeling that something, was watching me. Here I am. Come fucking get me. I'd egg on the demons and bogeymen lurking a mere stone's throw away. If my flashlight died, I might not be able to find my way back to the van. I pondered the irony of being suicidal and afraid of the dark simultaneously. These were strange times indeed. They were about to get stranger. I felt cold, a drop in my stomach. Walking back to the van, I heard the sound of acorns falling from the surrounding trees, a sound that freaked me out constantly because it was identical to footsteps. Usually logic won over my fears, and a blissful state of willful ignorance would allow me to ignore these childish delusions, but I noticed that these sounds weren't coming from the trees. It came from an abandoned shed about 40 yards behind the van, which was in the clearing, where there certainly were no trees. I fed my paranoia, stopping dead in my tracks in front of the van. I stood there motionless, listening to the roaring silence in between faint heart throbs. I decided not to look. Surely there was nothing there. I had nothing to worry about. And who cares anyway? If someone's stalking me and decides to come put me out of my misery, then I'm all for it. It would save me the time of writing a suicide note. That was the snarky, defeatist testimony that finally stilled my writhing nerves. Whether I believed it or not, I got back into the van and lit a cigarette. Depressed and tired, I couldn't bring myself to dive back into the deep pages of Moby Dick. I was thoroughly unsettled, although I couldn't quite figure out why. "Where the fuck is she?" I said aloud. My apathy was contingent on a steady state of numbness. an equation that only my drug of choice could balance. I chalked up my uneasiness to withdrawals. Crunch, crunch, a deer trotted off in the distance from deep within the woods, off beyond the drop-off of thick bushes and trees. Crunch, crunch, it steadily grew nearer, and I noticed it wasn't the regular four-legged fawns that took their leisurely strolls in the moonlight. No. This was a two-legged anomaly. I must note that I had spent a great deal of time in this van, alone, longer than I'd care to admit. But in this time, I developed a conditioned stimuli to when my better half returned home, like a dog eagerly crouched by the door of its master's domain, wagging its tail at the familiar sound of car keys coming up the steps to greet him after a long day of limbo solitude. Now, I mentioned there was a road nearby. I could always tell when she was returning, first by the sound of music intertwined with the grumbling engine of her friend, in his big truck coming up the road. I could hear the car door slam, and out she'd hop into the night, wobbling through the clearing up to the driver's side of the van, and around to finally show her devilish grin in the entrance to our said humble abode. But this unmistakable 1-2 step was coming from deep within the woods, from beyond the drop-off in the thick bushes and trees, a demon coming straight out of no man's land, impossibly steady. Like a metronome, it drew nearer and nearer. Crunch, 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 crunch. I cautiously drew the curtains aside and saw quite possibly the most disturbing thing that could have been there. Nothing. Absolutely nothing but trees dimly illuminated by my flashlight of hope. Crunch, crunch, I rubbed my eyes and stared into the abyss, with no avail. Crunch, crunch, I desperately flicked my eyes around, failing to comprehend what was coming my way. The thing had to be right in front of my face by now, but I saw nothing, absolutely nothing but the trees and the darkness. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Time froze. It stopped at my door. If I opened the door from where I was sitting and reached my hand out, I could surely touch it. In every horror movie you've ever seen, this is the moment where something pops out, or at the very least there is a large bang. I did not blink. The only sound that broke the roar of silence was a lone acorn dropping off in the distance. I waited for anything to happen, for this fellow fiend or foe to reveal itself. My mind scrambled to explain this intrusion, with no avail. In one swift movement, I did quite possibly the largest act of bravery I have ever committed and flung the door wide open, flashlight flooding hopeful rays into the jungle of night. Much to my dismay, there was nothing there. Finally I blinked, utterly terrified, alone, silence. I laid there for an undeterminable amount of time, waiting, listening. I called out for my friend. Surely this was another cruel trick played on me by the mischievous whore. Silence. 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 I longed for an acorn to fall. I was shook. I peered out of the door, to the left, to the right. I needed to sleep. I was hearing things. It's the drugs making you paranoid. Anything to keep the unbearable thought of holy shit whatever that was still outside. I slammed the door shut and locked it. I am crazy. I am hearing things. This is not real. I retreated to the back of the van, clutching my book, my flashlight, and a golf club for protection. Ignore this terrible dream, I said. I read the same sentence over and over for as long as I could bear. 5 minutes passed. I began to relax. 10 minutes, 20 minutes, I'm not quite sure. Someone giggled directly outside my door. Whatever was out there sat for a solid 20 minutes in complete silence, just watching me. I died. The startling nearness of the shrill but brief laughter undid the previous half hour of reassurance, and I felt the pure terror of dreams where you try to run or scream, but you can't. All I could do was stare and wait. Just then I heard music and the familiar low grumble of my fateful friend returning from her night of dishonest work. I heard the big truck approach, its car door slam, the familiar wobble up to the van on the proper side. The van door slid open, and there she stood in all her glory, horrifyingly unaware of the evil entity that she was basking in. "What the fuck's your deal?" She laughed. "You look like you've seen a ghost." When I think back to that night, I kinda wish I had. She hopped in the van, slammed the door behind her, and with a grin revealed a bag containing the only substance blacker than night. "Here you go, baby. You must be starving." Fifth story. There is something evil in the woods. It all started 2 months ago, and I can't keep it to myself any longer. My friends and family listened to me with interest at the beginning, but by now they roll their eyes and grow impatient when I bring up the thing living in the woods. I'll give some context and then try my best to describe the horrors that have been unfolding. I live right on the edge of an enormous forest, and I mean it when I say it is huge. The number of endangered species that live in these woods means that nobody can build or live in it, and hiking off the trails is strictly prohibited. Although the forest is miles and miles deep, if you want to follow the law, then you are restricted to a trail that follows the edge of the forest and hardly shows you anything. It is also known that Native Americans used to live in these woods, and hikers happen across arrowheads there sometimes. Well, lately I've been going through a bad breakup and spending a lot of time alone for a change. I've found that the only way I can truly forget my problems and my depression for a little while is to hike in the woods and explore. I had been leaving my house with a backpack loaded with some snacks and water, as well as my knife and a joint to smoke. Like I said, my house is a little isolated and right on the edge of the woods, so I walk about 200 yards and I am there. Lately, I had made a habit of heading off the trail and directly into the woods, going slightly deeper with each hike. I rarely saw anyone on the trail in the first place, so I wasn't worried about getting caught off the trail by anybody. Plus, I have survival experience in case anything happened. It helped me put things in perspective to be out in nature alone. Plus, sometimes I would happen across a really great view, or something cool like an old chair or an ancient can of beans. So this day is no different. I left my house with my backpack and headed to the forest. It didn't take long until I was off the trail and heading deep into the woods. The sun was out, but the trees are so tall and thick that it seems dark even on a bright day. A couple rays of sunshine managed to break through the canopy of branches and leaves, providing a nice contrast to the dark stillness of the forest below. I took in the sights and walked through the woods almost entirely through mechanical instinct. My mind was miles away, focused on my troubles and how upset I was about life at that moment. I was in a dark place that day, and even hiking wasn't breaking me out of it. I think being so mentally distracted is what led me to hike further than I ever intended to, and way further than I had ever gone before. I might have even taken several wrong turns from my usual landmarks. I don't even know. All I know is what happened soon after. I had been walking for at least another 45 minutes or an hour before I consciously realized that I was lost. I usually followed a creek or looked at the mountains in the distance for reference, but at this point I was actually at the base of the mountain. It stood before me, craggy and barren with less trees and more rocks the further you climbed. It was the first mountain of the mountain range, and behind me was the dense and dark forest. I cursed myself for hiking this far in a daze, because judging from the sun, I only had about an hour of good sunlight left in the day before the woods started getting really creepy. Quickly, I decided to get a vantage point on the mountain so that I could see which way was home. I found a nice overlook a little ways above the tree lean and found the direction I needed to head back in. This calmed my nerves a bit, and I decided it was a good spot to take a break. I gulped down a bottle of water and ate some snacks as I admired the view. I loved how the tops of the trees stretched as far as the eye could see, hiding everything going on below. It was the humbling perspective I was looking for. I began smoking a joint before heading back, feeling my buzz get stronger as I scanned the horizon aimlessly. I was nearly done with the joint when my eyes settled on what looked like the biggest cat I had ever seen in my life wandering around in the clearing, just 40 feet down where I had just come from. Being high, it took me a moment to realize I was looking at a mountain lion that was easily the size of a large dog or bigger. My blood ran cold. The second my fear kicked in, it's like this animal sensed it. It peered up at where I was sitting from below and promptly darted out of sight, exactly towards where I had been able to climb up from. At this point, I am freaking the hell out. I knew that thing was coming to get me. I felt it in my gut that I was now being hunted. If you have ever felt this kind of fear, it is the most overwhelming, panicky feeling you will ever have. Time moves slowly, but at the same time your mind is freaking out and it is very easy to slip up and make a mistake. I grabbed my backpack, leaving behind all of my trash and snacks, and immediately begin running down mountain from the side opposite where I came from. I know I slipped at least twice from my busted knees and the chunk missing from my left palm, but at the moment I was feeling no pain and was entirely focused on getting home as fast as possible. I got down that hillside faster than I had ever moved before in my life. I truly wish I could end my story here and have it just be about a mountain lion. I really do. But when I reached the bottom of the mountain and was ready to haul ass in the direction of home, I got the most evil and horrible feeling that I was being watched. I ignored every instinct to run away and decided to look behind me. What I saw haunts me. About 40 or so feet up the mountainside, at the exact spot I was smoking and eating it moments ago, stands an old Native American man. Even from where I am standing, I can see his rugged, bark-colored skin and his unkempt silver hair. He is wearing a robe of what appears to be animal skins adorned with feathers, like someone from a different era. I notice that he is staring directly at me, and he is very, very mad. There were tears running down his face, but his eyes were unblinking and fixated on me in a complete rage. I have never seen such evil and hatred in my entire life. His eyes were bugging out of his face, and his mouth was fixed in a horrible grimace. His arms were stuck at his sides, but his shoulders were shaking violently, his entire body rocking in place. And he was angry and staring directly at me. Staring at this person seemed like an eternity, even though it was probably just 5 seconds in reality. I turned and bolted. I was completely terrified. I was tearing through the woods, getting cut up by branches when I heard a horrifying screech/scream just a short ways behind me. It sounded like a beast and a human at the same time, as well as sounded completely angry yet sad at the same time. I was losing my mind with fear. I was ready at any moment to die some sort of horrible fate. I had no idea what was after me at this point or what was going to happen. And then I heard another scream, even angrier and louder than before. I'm not proud to admit that I shat my pants during all of this. I am running like an Olympic athlete through the woods at this point. I hardly even remember how long I was running, but eventually I broke through the woods and found myself on a country road that I knew was several miles from my home. It was nearly completely dark now. Being on the road didn't satisfy me, as I kept running down the road, putting distance between me and the forest. As I ran, I managed to get phone out and clumsily dial the closest person in my contacts list, my neighbor Phil. Hello. Hey Phil, I'm really in a bit of an emergency and was wondering if you could pick me up at the road I was on. I'd really appreciate you. Also, could you bring a gun just in case? The comment about the gun seemed to really put him on edge. Wait, why? What's going on? It's nothing. I just think there might be a large animal or a predator out here, and it's getting dark. Phil seemed to get the urgency because I heard his truck door slam while he agreed to come pick me up. I thanked him sincerely and stayed on the phone with him while I waited for him to get there. It felt like an eternity, but soon enough his truck pulled up and I hopped inside. Phil seemed both wary and irritated that I had him rush out to pick me up, but I couldn't care less. I was just thankful to be heading home at that point. Phil quickly seemed to realize that I had defecated myself, but had the decency to not say anything. He asked me what the hell happened and why I was such a bloody mess. I told him that I was hiking and got stalked by a mountain lion and fled, as he nodded in understanding. But once I mentioned that I thought I saw an old Native American man, the energy in the vehicle completely changed. I could practically feel Phil's arm hairs raise. "Have you ever seen anyone like that around here?" I asked him. He paused before replying, as if chewing on his words before deciding what to say. "No, but I don't think you should go out that ways ever again. You're asking for trouble." The car fell silent right as I realized we were pulling up to my house. I thanked Phil again and said goodnight as I shut the truck door and started walking up my driveway. My house is rather isolated, so there are no street lights or neighbors close by, and I hadn't turned on my porch lights before leaving. Thankfully, it was a full moon, and my driveway and lawn were illuminated in a soft nocturnal glow. It had surprising visibility, partly due to the moon and partly because I had been outside as it grew dark. I had all but forgotten about what happened in the woods. My mind could only focus on how happy I was to be safe and home. I walked through my front door and gave one last look outside and saw him. The old Native American man was standing at the foot of my driveway. It was night, but I immediately knew it was him, from the body shape and from the angry, almost demonic body and shoulder swaying. "Holy shit!" I yell as I slam the door, triple lock it, and run to my room on the second floor. I locked my bedroom door, grabbed my gun from the nightstand, and locked myself in the bathroom closet. I laid there panting and seizing with my gun pointed at the door for what might have actually been hours until I somehow fell asleep. I woke up the next morning feeling immediate anxiety and fear. My body was covered in dried blood and scratches from the night before, and my loaded gun lay next to me on the floor. I picked it up and reluctantly did a sweep of the entire house, feeling like I was being watched the entire time. Even when I searched every room, I felt like I couldn't relax, so I decided to look around outside of the house. What I found horrifies me. There were claw marks about 3 feet off the ground on both the front door and the back door. Something monstrous had tried getting in last night. I just hadn't heard because I was on the second story locked in the closet. I really have no explanation for what I experienced, but things have actually been getting freakier since then. About 2 weeks later, I began finding dead animals in front of the door when I came home. At first, it was just a squirrel here or there, but the last animal that was left was a cat. Weirdest part is that there are no wounds or blood on the corpse. They just show up dead, like their necks were snapped or they were poisoned. I'm thoroughly freaked out and have thought about calling the police, but without any evidence they couldn't do anything. I also live in an isolated forest area, so even if I asked them to patrol by my house, it would be unrealistic. I've even considered selling my home and moving, but I can't bring myself to simply uproot like that. I've been trying to research the forest history and whether any crimes have occurred or people have gone missing, but I haven't found anything. Even trying to talk to friends and family is fruitless since they think I'm losing my mind once I mentioned a Native American man. There is one friend I talk to who believes me, but he wants to go with me back to the spot and try to confront this thing/person. This idea terrifies me, but I feel like I must do something. The bodies are showing up more and more frequently, and I feel like it's only going to get worse. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.